friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Proverbs chapter 27, verses 9 and 10. We hope that you will join the conversation this evening. If you have any thoughts, comments, or ideas about what we are discussing, please feel free to share those with us. If you're watching this live on our Facebook page, then please use the comment area beneath the live video to express your thoughts, ideas, and questions. If you have joined us live on our YouTube page, then feel free to use the chat area to the right of the video window. If you would prefer, you could also send your thoughts, comments, and ideas via a text message to 405-726-0874. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror, dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you would like to have your selfie included with these selfies, then take a picture of yourself and send it to selfie@johnduvall.net or text it to 405-726-0874. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. Working with a true friend, we will make better progress than we would if we were by ourselves. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our conversation will begin shortly. Good evening. Welcome to Together Though Apart. Our conversation will begin at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. We hope that you'll stick around and join us as we seek to be together though apart. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17. There are times when we are glad that we have friends, but then there are times when we are truly thankful for our friends. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. There are times when it is easy to be friendly, but then there are times when it takes great love to be the friend who sticks closer than a brother. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. Do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Proverbs chapter 27, verses 9 and 10. We hope that you will join the conversation this evening. If you have any thoughts, comments, or ideas about what we are discussing, please feel free to share those with us. If you're watching this live on our Facebook page, then please use the comment area beneath the live video to express your thoughts, ideas, and questions. If you have joined us live on our YouTube page, then feel free to use the chat area to the right of the video window. If you would prefer, you could also send your thoughts, comments, and ideas via a text message to 405-726-0874. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror, dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, love, these three. But the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you would like to have your selfie included with these selfies, then take a picture of yourself and send it to selfie@johnduvall.net or text it to 405-726-0874. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Tuesday night's edition of Together, Though Apart. I hope that you've had a wonderful day today, and maybe it's getting just a little bit better. Well, here in a little bit, we're going to pick up on our study of Proverbs. We are in chapter 25, verse 16. It's where we'll resume here in a few moments. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 16. It's good to see those who have chimed in the Facebook chat room It's good to see everyone with us here for our study tonight, for our conversation. If you are joining us for the first time, don't hesitate to sign in. And when I mean sign in, if you're watching us on our Facebook live video stream, use the comment area and tell us who you are and say hello. If you don't mind telling us where you're from, that'd be great too. If you're watching us on our Facebook page, I'll get this all right here in a minute, on our Facebook page, then you can use the chat area. Now, both the Facebook page and the YouTube channels are John Duvall videos. So if you'd like to subscribe to the YouTube page, I invite you to do that. Click the little bell notification icon there, and it'll remind you when we do go live. If you are watching us on the Facebook side of things, then follow the Facebook page and like the page if you would. That's John Duvall Videos. You can also text me at 405-726-0876 and 0874, that is, and all this is at the bottom of the screen. Alrighty, I don't have much extra information to share with you. I debated about whether or not to have the study tonight. Do you know why I debated about whether or not to have the study tonight? Well, I'll tell you why I debated. I debated it because the presidential debate takes place tonight. So I went ahead and checked, and apparently it starts 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time and 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. So you can get all nice and peaceful and comfortable from our Bible study here this evening, and then get all fired up during the debate if you choose to watch it. I was going to try to find a graphic, just one single graphic, but there's a lot of interesting ones. And you know, I'm not going to get into any side of this debate right now, but it's interesting the way they have laid out some of these images. You can almost see a bit of favoritism based on the images that they picked. I mean, you look at this one right here, Biden. It looks like a pretty good smile on his face. President Trump, not so much. This one right here, Biden seems to be more straightforward. President Trump, not so much. So you see what I'm saying? It might be a little bit of biasness here when they developed the graphics. But anyway, so if you're interested in the debate, that does begin, I think, at 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. Now, where to watch it at, I'm not real certain. I'm going to check the KLCO, which is our local ABC affiliate, and then check online, because I'm quite certain it'll probably be streamed at different locations online as well. And really, debates are for one purpose: to try to share reasons why you should vote for one person as opposed to the other. And one thing I've often seen about debates is, with debates, you have cheerleaders for both sides. And I don't mean that disrespectful, okay? I don't mean it disrespectful at all. But you have a debate, you have people that go to the debate who are already decided for this person. Or you've got people that go and they're already decided for this person right here. And so they're already there, and they're ready for tell them, and all that other stuff. And then you've got some in the middle who are trying to make their decision up over whatever issue is being debated. And so that's who the debates are kind of focused towards, the undecided voters. I guess it's possible they could sway someone to step over party lines. But anyway, so that's coming up tonight. So you can watch that if you'd like or not. Completely your choice. Your choice. All right, let's see. We've got others. Let's see, the Basses are with us tonight. We have the Carters and the Ormans with us. Jared Dart is with us from the wonderful state of Arizona. We have several of the crosses with us here as well. Rhonda, she's online somewhere or another watching. And Debbie does clarify for us, and let me share this just for those who live in the Oklahoma City, Edmond area. Channel 4 and Channel 5 apparently is where you will be able to watch the debate tonight if you choose to do that. Appreciate that, Debbie. Alrighty. Looks like Jared Dart has a job interview. Very good, Jared. Very good. Hope that works out for you. Hope it works out for you most certainly. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 25. We are resuming in verse 16. Proverbs chapter 25 there in verse 16. Let's see. I'm gonna mess with the size of this just a little bit. There you go. I like that formatting just a hair better. So notice what we read here. Solomon writes, and let's read probably 5 or 6 verses through here. He says, "Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you." Alrighty. Let's go ahead and go back up there to verse 16. One of the first things that comes to mind as we are reading through this is the idea of moderation, the idea of self-control in what we do. And so we're going to learn a lot from this, I think, here this evening. So notice the first thing we see here. Moderation. Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. There are certain times, and honey would be considered a delicacy. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. It might have even been this past Thursday night when we talked about honey there. And there's several biblical examples of individuals who ate honey. Jonathan, the son of Saul, found honey in a tree and ate that, and it lifted his countenance. Samson had killed a lion, and when he returns, he found a beehive. Bees had made a hive there within the carcass of the lion, and he ate honey from the beehive there. And so honey was kind of a nice sweet treat. If you could find it and eat it, then you would enjoy that. But the moderation is seen here, that even with something like that, you have to exercise self-control. Eat only as much as you need, because if not, like it says here, lest you be filled with it and vomit. Okay, that's a good a good warning. Hopefully you're done eating supper right by now, but it's a good warning. Look at verse 17. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Still talking about moderation now. Moderation, self-control, lest he become weary of you and hate you. I have known individuals in the past, not recently. Let me clarify that. Not in the last 13, 14 years, but going much farther back. And there was this one individual who was always dropping by the house, always coming by the house, and uninvited. And believe me, I don't mind uninvited guests. The only problem is if the house isn't cleaned up, then, it makes the wives a little bit irritated because the house isn't ready for guests. But this fellow would drop by, and ultimately, what we found out later is he had ulterior motives. He's trying to talk us into buying his house. But it was there, and sometimes it's some of the most inopportune times. And so we have to exercise, when we talk about hospitality, let me shift gears here just a little bit. We talk about hospitality. It is kind of a twofold idea. One, hospitality in the New Testament, the Greek word there means love of strangers. So we need to be willing to open our houses up when it is necessary, if need be, to help an individual, kind of the idea of hospitality. But then there's the idea of hospitality, the way that we like to think of it, and that is having people over to your homes. Okay, that's not so much the love of strangers, but it is still having people over to your homes. But this right here is kind of the reverse of that. All right, if you're going to invite yourself over to someone's house, or even if they invite you over, it is important to exercise discretion and discernment with how much you are over there. You know, he doesn't. Solomon doesn't cover, well, did they invite you or not? He doesn't cover that, and I don't think it's really relevant. You know, the simple fact is, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. Talking about your neighbor's house. That's a good life lesson to learn. And then there in verse 18, a man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. You can do a lot of damage if you bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, take in mind, or keep in mind, if you would, that many times when you read in the Proverbs about neighbors, I think it's much more, there's a greater meaning to it than simply living in a neighborhood and you have neighbors all around. Here we have neighbors aplenty. But a lot of times the neighbor who was near you, it would be important to be in good standing with that neighbor, especially if times began to get difficult. Maybe there came an invading army. Just a number of things that might call upon you to be appreciative of your neighbors. And so if you were to bear false witness against your neighbor, it would be like using a club or a sword or a sharp arrow against them. It does, and I think the point that he's making here, is that it does more damage than what we realize. You know, think about just telling a lie about somebody or gossiping about someone. You saying something that's not true. Slander, I think, is the term for the spoken word, and liable maybe the name for the written word. So if you speak something that's a lie about someone, it may seem to you it's not that big a deal. It's just me talking. I'm running my mouth off. No one really cares what I said. But the reality is a lot of harm is done when you bear false witness, and that seems to be Solomon's point. Okay, so let's take a moment now and check out the chat room here. Coming in from Facebook, Brother Charles. Charles writes, and this pertains to verse 16, what is legitimate and wholly proper in its place may prove very detrimental to all spiritual growth if it be permitted to become the supreme controlling power of life. Now, what Charles is referencing here is the passage that dealt with honey. All right, there we have it there. That's what we're looking at here. And so what Charles is saying, this is a very good point, may prove very detrimental to all spiritual growth if it be permitted to become the supreme controlling power of life. Paul recognized this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20. All things are lawful, but not all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. Let's turn over there for a moment. That is a really good connecting passage to connect with Proverbs chapter 25 there in verse 16. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20, this is what Charles is referencing here. Let me bring this up. Let's see. Let's not back up a little bit there. I know the passage that Charles is referencing. Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient. And he goes on to say that he will not allow himself to be brought under the power of any. And that's very much the same thing that we are seeing here. There we go, verse 23. Knew we were close to that. Verse 23, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Okay? And so when he says, let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. And Paul will say this again. Let's see, where else? See if this sends us in the right direction. And not that one. Let's try this one right here. Nope. One more. Let's see if that's what I'm thinking about. It is, let's bring over this one now. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. Very similar concept. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. All right, food's for the stomach and stomach for the foods, but God will destroy both of them, both it and them. And he goes on and talks about the sin of sexual immorality. Now, the point that we're making here is what the point that Charles is making. I think it's a very good point. The concept there of the honey eating too much, it shows us that we need to exercise discretion. We need to exercise self-control and recognize that even though it may be something that tastes good, something that is, that is enjoyable, whatever it may be, legitimate is the term Charles uses there, too much of it can bring us under its power and can become a detriment to us. Good point, Charles. Let's see, Kelvin shares with us the following thought. Talking about verse 18 here. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Spreads like wildfire, Kelvin writes, is an idiom with similar meaning. An unintended spark can result in devastating damage far and wide. That's exactly right. There's been some summers here in Oklahoma where we've been very dry. Basically a virtual drought for a period season. And they tell us there's a burn ban in place. And they tell people to be very careful. And I remember there's one summer it was so dry that they warned pulling off the side of the road onto a grassy area. Because if the underneath the car was too hot, or if there was a spark or something or another, you could ignite the grass and start a fire. And so much like the false witness that we're talking about, the gossiping, that's you could also consider here, like Kelvin says, spreads like a wildfire. It carries that same meaning. Unintended spark, resulting in devastating damage far and wide. Good point. I appreciate that. Okay. So let's now look at verse 19. Time to see the dentist. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Now, let's start with the end of it, the comparison here. He says it's like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Listen, although we have dentistry today, and if you've got a problem with your tooth, you go to the dentist. He might pull it. He might do a root canal. He might, cap it. He may, tap into the other. I think that is a root canal where you tap into the other roots. He does a number of things there to help save the tooth. Okay, but without dentists, if you get a bad tooth infection, then you got to do the Tom Hanks thing when he's on the island in the skate and knock the tooth out of your mouth with the skate, the ice skate, and a rock. Quite painful. So put yourself back during the time period that Solomon wrote this. They would have had teeth problems as well, just like we do. And so you can imagine, especially if you've gone through a toothache, if you can imagine the imagery here that is associated with this, a bad tooth and a foot out of joint, extremely painful. The bad tooth prevents you from eating. The bad tooth is pounding, and the foot out of joint prevents you from working the way you need to do, all the things like that. So here's a comparison, the contrast. He says, confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble. Did you see the two things there? I didn't bring it up on the screen. Confidence. You decide to trust somebody. You decide to put confidence in a man that you know to be unfaithful. And this is crucial because of the time of trouble, and you've got to put confidence in that guy. And that guy will probably let you down. He will probably fail you. And that's why he compares it to a bad tooth or a foot out of joint. You need to take caution as to whom you place confidence during times of trouble. Interesting. Very interesting. All right, let's look at the next one, verse 20. Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. So we're looking at the New King James translation of this. So I am out of curiosity. I want to compare this with the English Standard Version, and then we'll pop over and compare it to the New American Standard Version. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on soda. That seems to be pretty consistent there. Let's jump over now real quick to the New American Standard Version. And the New American Standard Version offers the following here: like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar on soda, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart. Alrighty, let's see if we can figure out what Solomon is saying here. Let's come back to our text. Alright, let's break this one down a little more slowly. He begins by saying, like one who takes away a garment in cold weather. Let's start there. So you have an individual. He is wearing a garment that keeps him warm during the cold, and someone comes and takes that away. If the soda is like what we understand soda, and he's not talking about soda pop either. He's talking about, it would be the equivalent of our baking soda if I understand it right. And this could be one of those things that they're not quite certain what he's referencing. But if you think about the combination of vinegar on soda and what happens with that, he says, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. You would think someone that's singing songs to someone that has a heavy heart, that would be a good thing. But when you do that, it's like an individual who takes away a garment in cold weather. That's interesting. That's kind of a puzzling one right there. Matter of fact, let me share with you one more secret tool that I have here. Not really a secret tool, but I have access to the ESV Study Bible, and sometimes they have pretty good thoughts on things. So let's see. This one probably will be too small. Their thoughts on this is quite interesting and a little bit small for you to read. Putting vinegar, which is acetic, on soda, which is alkaline, we've talked about that, does no good, destroying the distinctive properties of both. Okay, that's what came to mind first when I was thinking about vinegar and soda. There was years ago when Michael was in elementary school, we set up a small little science, not really science experiment, but science demonstration he had to do. It was like 4th or 5th grade. And so it was something really simple. We took a water bottle and put baking soda in the water bottle, and he had a small little, or actually what happened was we put vinegar in the water bottle, and he had a little thing of baking soda. And so what he did was, in front of the class, he crushed the water bottle down, took the top off of it, then poured the vinegar in on top of the baking soda, put the lid on real quick, and the bottle expanded. Okay, well, that seems to be what they're talking about. And so the point is, it does no good. You take away the garment during the cold weather, it does no good. You sing songs to a heavy heart, Solomon warns, it does no good. Okay, let's see. Charles shares something that I did not think about. Let me bring this up. Charles, it's a very good point. Charles writes, David's soothing music only aggravated King Saul. That's a good point. 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. The Spirit of the Lord had left Saul because Saul had sinned against the Lord, and an angering spirit came upon Saul. Let's look at that. That's a good example of when it doesn't, it does no good to try to sing a song to someone who is of a sad heart. Yep, let's look at that. Now the distressing spirit from the Lord, I said angering, distressing spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand. And David was playing music with his hand. Then Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear. But he slipped away from Saul's presence, and he drove the spear into the wall. So the next time you try to sing a song to brighten the spirits of someone who is in the dumps, watch out. They might just throw a javelin at you. All right, but that's a good example of what Solomon is saying here. All right. Any other thoughts? I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share and you're watching us on our Facebook page, which is John Duvall Videos, if that's where you're at, use the comment area there. And while you're at it, like the page if you would. Follow us so you'll receive notifications when we go live. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, John Duvall Videos, then you can use the chat area to drop your comments in. Love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe to the page and click the bell so you'll receive future notifications. You can also send me a text at 405-726-0874. Now back to Proverbs. I missed Janice's comment. Let's bring Janice's comment in real quick. Weep with those who weep. A heavy heart needs sympathy, not grating on the nerves by happy songs. It will leave one cold when there is no understanding for the situation. Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 9, running down through verse 21. Within that section, Paul, the Apostle Paul, instructs the brethren within that context there of Romans 12, beginning in verse 9. He goes on to say, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And that's a very good point. If there's someone who is depressed, someone who's down in the dumps, someone who's weeping, then weep with them. Don't try to sing a song to lift their spirits. You weep with them. Share in their heavy heart with empathy. Good point. Very, very good point. Okay. I like that. So let's come back now to verse 21. Let's read a few more passages here. Actually, we read this a while ago. Now, I'm going to give you this assignment, and so you've got about 30 seconds to a minute to think about it, type it in before I reference it. What New Testament Bible passage references this proverb? If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he's thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. And I'll give you a hint. I've already mentioned the passage. Okay, I've already mentioned the overall passage. So let's look at this proverb, because this proverb is used in the New Testament. Notice what he says here. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. So let's start there with your enemy. Now, one of the things that is important to understand, if you have an enemy, especially during this time frame, but if you have an enemy, what do you think would be most conducive to your livelihood, to your health, to your successful life, if you would? Would it be more conducive to keep the person your enemy, or to try to befriend the individual who is your enemy? Now, I'm not talking about doing things you shouldn't do. I'm not talking about bending to pressures and things of that nature. But there are things you can do towards your enemy that in the end may turn your enemy away from their status of being your enemy to being your friend. And that's what he's talking about. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. The normal way of thinking is, you're my enemy. I'm not going to waste my food on you. I'm not going to waste my water on you. That's kind of the normal way of approaching things. But that's not what Solomon is saying here. You need to be willing to give food to your enemy. Give him drink. And here's why. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Now, that statement there, and I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more side help from the ESV Study Bible, because I think this is a good one to look towards for this right here. That phrase, you'll heap coals of fire on his head, has been one that's been has been discussed a great deal, because it seems like an odd statement there. So here's what they have to say. The image of burning coals, I think you might be able to read the passage that is the answer to the question. The image of burning coals does not imply something that harms the enemy, because it further explains the bread and the drink in Proverbs 25:21. He says, which do him good, and also because Proverb forbids taking personal vengeance. So here's the point that they're making, and it's not overly helpful, but I think it's a good point to consider. The idea of heaping coals of fire on his head is not something bad. It's not some little way of getting even with them. Nothing like that. It is something that is going to be good for them. So you're heaping coals of fire on his head. It causes them to stop and rethink rethink their approach to you. It gives them something positive to think about you because you're willing to help them out. And in the end result, the Lord will reward you. So let's see, we've got some comments coming into the chat room here. So let me go ahead and bring those into our discussion. Let's see. Arthel shares with us from Matthew chapter 5, 43 through 44. Okay, Jesus says, "You have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." Pardon me. Now, what's interesting about this is that this concept, this way of treating our enemies, was not something new taught by Jesus. When you look at the Old Testament scriptures, such as the Proverbs that we are considering here, there is the idea of doing kind, being kind towards your enemies. Now, I recognize that under the law, under the Old Testament time period, God oftentimes would destroy the enemies of Israel. But the reason why he would destroy them wasn't simply because they were their enemies, but it had to do with the way they treated Israel. It had to do with the sins and things of that nature. But when it came down to a one-on-one situation, it would be better to try to not maintain a status of enemy with an individual, but to correct that and turn that individual into your friend by being kind to them, loving your enemy, as Arthel shares with us. Dan points us over in answer to the question there to Romans chapter 12, verse 20. That is right. And Aaron did the same thing, Romans 12, verse 20. And then Janice points us to the same thing. So Dan, Aaron, and Janice points us all to Romans chapter 12, verses 20 and 21. And Arthel shares the text with us. "Therefore, if thine enemy is hungry, feed him. If he thirst, give him a drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." And then Charles, let's bring this one up. Charles writes, "Returning good for evil causes the guilty to feel the guilt of his actions, and it convicts him of his wrongdoing, and in a way causes him some humiliation." I think that's a very good point to be considered with that. When you do good to someone that has done you wrong, that basically turns everything upside down. And it causes them, even if they don't admit it, it causes them to step back and reevaluate what they did and what they've done. Now, it might not change them, but at least there is the ignition there to do that. When I mean ignition, there's the spark that should start the fire of change within their heart. And it would be better that your actions lead someone to no longer being your enemy than to intentionally behave in a way that would turn someone into your enemy. And there I'm talking about because you've done something harmful to them. It'd be better to do that which is good and helpful. Very good comments. Very, very good comments. I appreciate that. All right, let's pick up now in verse 23, and let's read to the end of the chapter. How about that? Proverbs chapter 25, beginning here in verse 23. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to share them with us in the comment area that is associated with this live Facebook stream or the chat area on our live YouTube stream. Or send me a text at 405-726-0874. So, the north wind. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, and angry countenance. It is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than a house shared with a contentious woman. As cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a far country. A righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring and a polluted well. It is not good to eat much honey, so to seek one's own glory is not glory. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Now, there are some proverbs that you can chisel on a rock and hang, or on a tablet and hang in your house. Or crochet them, needlepoint, whatever, paint them, and hang them in your house. These are some really powerful proverbs. And what I mean by powerful is they help us understand things in life. It helps us to make better decisions. We've mentioned this several times before, that as a young person growing up, if you'll study the Proverbs while you go through life, there will be times that you will read a proverb and say, I now understand that because I saw that happen to somebody, or because this happened to me. I now understand what Solomon is saying. And so they're very practical. Some of them are very spiritual. Some of them have direct spiritual applications. But notice what he says here in verse 23. He says, the north wind brings forth rain. Okay? So this, people throughout the years have learned how to watch the weather patterns. They are able to look for signs within the sky. The old saying, red sky in the morning, is a sailor's warning. They know that if they see red sky in the morning, that they're going to encounter storms at some point during that day. But if there's red skies at night, then they know that the nighttime is going to be peaceful. Then and the next day is going to be calm. So while we have all of our fancy technology that can tell us the direction a hurricane is headed and tell us when we might receive rain as a result of that, people have been for years looking with their own eyes, and they've been able to tell at least what type of weather is coming. So here's my point. It was well accepted the north wind brings forth rain. Guarantee. Write it down, mark it, it'll happen. So what does it have to do with the latter half of the Proverbs? It's the latter half of verse 23. It's the same level of certainty. And a backbiting tongue will bring an angry countenance. Guaranteed. Okay? Just as a north wind brings forth rain, if you have a backbiting tongue, it's going to bring an angry countenance. Now, I believe the angry countenance will be of the one who you are backbiting, the one that you're gossiping about, the one that you're talking about. It will bring their anger upon you. Most certain. The next one, it is better, speaking of anger, if you backbite, it is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. Now, I want you to notice that he does clarify this. He doesn't say than in a house shared with a woman. He clarifies a contentious woman. All right, so there's already a specific type of woman being addressed here. And so he's telling his son, his offspring, and maybe his grandsons, he's telling them that it would be much better for you to dwell in the corner of the house than in the house shared with a contentious woman. In other words, avoid a contentious woman, so to speak. Solomon had 300 wives, 700 concubines. This was something that was not new. And it doesn't take a lot of wisdom to figure out. It just takes experience to understand. And men can be just as contentious, but Solomon's approaching this from a husband and wife, I think, husband and wife scenario. And then in verse 25, actually before we go there, let's back up, and Charles has a comment that relates to verse 24. Charles writes, contentious woman suggests constant quarreling about decisions. Who, how, what, and why. She never backs away from her nagging commitment to quarrelsomeness. It goes way beyond just her opinions against yours. Argumentative is another term that we might use, Charles, but I think that's a good point. It's a very good point. And Arthel, he writes, we should show ourselves uneasy if we hurt a dear friend. Oh, let me reread that. You wrote it right. I read it wrong. We should show ourselves uneasy if we heard a dear friend whom we value evil spoken of. The same dislike we should show of evil speaking in general. That's a very valid point. I mean, you think about the number of times, have you ever heard someone speak negatively or speak evil about someone you knew, and someone that you knew very well? Well, it gets you up, it gets you all riled up because you want to defend the individual. So that's a good point. Very, very good point there. Talking about that a backbiting tongue brings a guaranteed angry countenance. And it very well could be the countenance of others who know the individual that you are speaking evil against. Okay, let's see. And verse 25. You want to drink cold water? Here's what he says. As cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a far country. Again, one of those comparison type things, all right? The ultimate message is good news from a far country is good. Okay, now he doesn't specify what type of good news, and he doesn't specify how far away from, how far away the country is. It could be that you've gotten word they're not going to invade you. They're not going to try to conquer you. Maybe they've taken their armies and decided to go home. Either way, such good news is like cold water to a weary, weary soul. And then verse 26, a righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring and a polluted well. Real quick, let's check the cross-reference for polluted. Ruined, if you can see that, there is another word that could be used. So, let's look at the latter half of this first. He references a murky spring or a polluted well. So, you're out and about and traveling. You don't have a bunch of bottled waters on you like we might carry today in our cars. You're on your camel, you're on your horse, you're traveling out from one place to the other, and you're thirsty, your water supply is running low, and you see a spring ahead. So you decide to go and get fresh water from that spring. But when you get there, there's something off about the water. It's murky. There's a mud suspended within the water there. And you realize the water's not drinkable for you. He uses also the term a ruined well. So you've dug a well, and you've been drawing water out of that well for years, but then something happens, and the water within the well becomes polluted. You begin to use that water to give your animals something to drink. They begin to die. You realize there's something wrong with the water in the well. Now, that is used to show how bad it is when a righteous man falters before the wicked. See, you can't count on the well for water. You can't count on the murky spring to provide you the quench, to quench your thirst. Just like you can't count on that righteous man who falters before the wicked. It's something to think about, especially in the day and age in which we live. We've got to continue, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 10, to always be able to take and be willing to take a stand. Just very, very, very important. Regarding verse 25, Charles shares the following, and talking about the cold water and the good news from a far country. Charles thinks about the Samaritan woman. She found the good news that Jesus brought to her revitalizing and worth sharing with her thirsty neighbors. That's a good example. John chapter 4, beginning there in verse 6. That's a great example of that. She shared this life-giving water, the good news that Jesus brought, with her thirsty neighbors. Good point. Good point. And then Dan shares with us in regards to verses 16 and verse 27. He says, I think Solomon had some trouble with eating honey. You might be right about that. He may have had, as we would call it, a sweet tooth for that. That's a good point. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and bring that in now there in verse 27. So it is not good to eat much honey. Okay, so now again, we have a series of comparisons or contrasts being made to help us understand the point. So this one's a little bit reversed. You go back to some of the other ones. Let me scroll back here real quick, slowly. Here we have a righteous man, and that's compared to the murky spring, the one who falters. And here we have it the other direction. Here's the example, a cold water to a weary soul. And here is really what the point is, good news from a far country. So, come down to verse 27. The point is, so to seek one's own glory is not glory. All right, so that's the ultimate message there with that proverb. We ought not to seek our own glory. Because if we do, let's say if we seek our own glory, and people feel compelled to pat you on the back, then it's really not true glory. I mean, you stop and think about it for a moment. If you stand up before everybody and you begin to tout all the great things that you have done, you want to make them aware of all the things that you have done, so that they'll come up and pat you on the back and say, "Boy, we appreciate you so much. You've done a great job. We're so glad you did all that." Well, you have kind of solicited their glorying you, if you would, by your behavior, by your actions. And he says that's not real glory. But the individual who other people will come up to you and they will glory you, okay? They will commend you for what you've done. They compliment you for what you've done. And you weren't seeking that at all. You just did what you knew that you needed to do. Well, that's different. But when you seek your own glory and you get it, it's not true glory. Does that make sense? So now compare that to honey. It's not good to eat much honey. It's not. And Solomon makes that point to show that it's not good to seek your own glory. All right, good point, Dan. Good point. And then in talking about verse 27, Charles writes the following: warning against trying to find the answers to questions that are unanswerable. All right, this is, let's see. Oh, he references the book, Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, attempt to discover answers to many such mysteries. That's right. So much so that Solomon finally concluded, after trying a bunch of things, it's all vanity. It's all vanity. And then, let's see. Charles also references Deuteronomy 29:29 comes to mind, and I think it has to do with the secret things of God belongs to God. I think that's what Deuteronomy 29:29 says. Let me just confirm that. There we go. Yep. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law, he writes. All right, good point. All right, one more, verse 28, before we hit the end of the chapter there, so let's bring this up. Again, if you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to share them with us. We'd love to hear from you. Here Solomon now writes, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Go back to verse 16 and look at all the Proverbs that we've considered just tonight that essentially talks about self-control, even to the one of glorying and causing other people to glory you. These have something to do with self-control. And so whoever has no rule over his own spirit, let's talk about that for just a moment. It is so important that we exercise self-control. There are so many things in our world today that it would be tempting to devote our time and our energies towards. And what happens is when we do that, we end up losing control or giving up control of our own life. We're supposed to rule our own spirit. Even the prophets, and I think Paul makes this point in 1 Corinthians 14, I believe it is, even the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. And what he means by that is, although the prophets were given a message from the Holy Spirit to share, they still controlled how that came out of their bodies. In other words, the prophet made the decision of when to speak and when not to speak. He was given stuff by the Holy Spirit, but he still had control over when he was to speak. And so the idea here that Solomon is conveying is whoever has no rule over his own spirit. Listen, we're supposed to control ourselves. We're supposed to exercise self-control, rule our spirit. That's what we're supposed to do. But if we don't rule our spirits, then we'll become like the foolish man. We do everything that we want to do. We try everything we want to try. We may choose to involve ourselves in something that is harmful to us. Although we think it may be pleasurable, it ultimately is harmful, and it begins to rule our lives. It's one of the biggest problems with addictions. Addictions control the individual. And when we are no longer in control of our life, or when we cease to control our lives, then our life falls into a disarray. That's the latter part of verse 28. Is like a city broken down without walls. That would eventually describe Jerusalem. When the Israelites were in Babylonian captivity, the walls fell into disrepair. And so Nehemiah, when he finally goes back, his job is kind of a twofold job. Let's get the walls rebuilt. Let's get Jerusalem back in working order. And let's begin once again fully worshiping the Lord the way that we need to. But it's a great point. If you don't rule your own spirit, then your demise will be certain. Be like a city broken down without walls. All right, let's jump over to, let's see. There we go. Let's see if this made it over. I hit a wrong button. Arthel writes, to the pleasure of sense, for it is not good to eat much honey, though it pleases the taste, and if eaten with moderation, is very wholesome. Yet, if eaten to excess, it becomes nauseous, creates bile, and is the occasion of many diseases. I guess I never realized that, but I've always ate honey in moderation, on toast, on biscuit, on things like that. But I would imagine that if you had an opportunity, and you had raw honey especially, unprocessed honey straight from the hive or from the honeycomb, if you consumed enough of it, it would make you sick. A little bit too much. And then Charles writes, actually this comes from Nona. Sorry, this one did not make it over. There we go. This is from Nona. In Genesis 9, verses 20 through 21, Moses could not enter the promised land. Sorry about that. My thing is doing something weird. There we go. Matter of fact, let's see. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. In relation to what we're talking about here, lack of, and what this is referencing, sorry, remove from queue. There we go. Arthel's comment just keeps popping back up there. The computer thinks it's that good, it keeps bringing it back up. All right. Yeah, you think about Moses. This is a great example of a lack of self-control. Talking about one who has no rule over his own spirit. And in this case, it was spawned by anger. I mean, think about what Ephesians chapter 4 tells in beginning of verse 25 and following within the list of things there that we are not to do. He says, be angry and sin not. Do not let the sun go down upon your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Well, when we don't rule our spirits, one of the things that can take advantage of us is our emotions. And so that's what happened to Moses in Numbers chapter 20. God had told him to speak to the rock. Moses was angry with the people. He said, look here, you rebels, what we must do for you. And then he strikes the rock. The rock brings forth water. God rebukes Moses because he did not glorify God in front of the people. All because he did not rule his spirit at that crucial moment. Excellent point. Excellent point. Alrighty, I tell you what, let's plan to stop here for this evening. That will put us at chapter 26, verse 1 on Thursday night. And that should be October 1. Okay. So Thursday night, October 1st, we'll continue with chapter 26, verse 1 of our study through Proverbs. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Remember, the presidential debate, if you were so interested in watching that, is going to begin here in just a couple of minutes. And let's see how it goes, of course. But remember, when everything is said and done, the greatest thing for us to do, the most important thing, is for us to serve God. And let's thrive on His wisdom, His knowledge, His understanding, His discretion, His discernment, all these things taught to us in His wonderful Word. Let us know them, let us live by them, let us let them, this knowledge, this wisdom, help control and to steer our life as we go through the difficult time period that we're facing. Just got to keep these things in mind. Let's go ahead and we will end with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the wisdom that is found within your word. Dear Lord, we pray that we will have the understanding to make application of what we have considered here this evening, that we will learn the lessons from your word and apply them within our lives as we strive to live as your children. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you will watch over the leaders of our land. We pray that they will lead in a way that we can continue a quiet and peaceful life in service unto you. We ask that you please watch over us and please be with your children, dear Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Alrighty, we'll see everyone Thursday night right back here at 7 o'clock Central Daylight Time on the next Together, Though Apart. Have a great evening.